Hi, everyone. So today and every weekday until May 26th, I am sharing essential practices from my new book, Manifesto for Moral Revolution, which is a book that I wrote essentially because the systems that we have in our world today, when we look around, have pretty much run their course. Yet we haven't determined with what to replace them. And the old ways of doing things aren't working. And so essentially, Manifesto for Moral Revolution is a set of operating skills and, importantly, operating practices to not only navigate an interdependent world, but to build the kinds of systems and solutions that are more inclusive and sustainable, and that insist on moving profit out of the center of our systems and instead putting our shared humanity and the earth. I've spoken over the last few days, one, about the definition of the word moral, which I think we need to repeat and reconsider. This book is not taking the stance that moral is a set of rigid rules prescribed from some higher authority and handed down. Rather, moral is a framework that recognizes our interdependence and understands that in a fully interdependent world, we need to have the courage to navigate sometimes opposing truths, but all toward the end of our own dignity and our dignity, not only for this generation, but for many generations. I've spoken in the past week about some of the essential skills like deep listening, redefining success, cultivating moral imagination, using identity as a tool to connect rather than as a weapon to divide. And today I want to talk about a skill, a practice that we too often don't think of as a practice. And that is courage. Because so often we look at other people and we think they must have been born courageous. How did they get that courage? Frankly, I've never met anyone who was born courageous. The way that we build courage, particularly if we think of it as a muscle, is to practice courage, sometimes in very small ways, sometimes in extremely large ways. Right now, in the midst of this crisis, we need a lot of courage. And courage not only to speak one's truth in a way that it doesn't matter if anyone hears it, but courage to speak on behalf of those who may not have voice. Courage to speak on behalf of those for whom change is critical, even if we don't gain in the short term. And so we all have to practice courage, which is the title of chapter 6. So here goes. I was a child of the 1960s, a time of heaving change, when cracks surfaced in ancient institutions and the tightly woven fabric of society began to loosen. In 4th grade, girls were allowed to wear nice pants on Fridays to public schools, and even my Catholic elementary school stopped requiring uniforms. Through Vatican II, Pope John XXIII transformed the Catholic Church's relationship to the modern world. The birth control pill was introduced, and movements for civil rights and human freedoms broke out across the globe. Even then, most girls refrained from sports, took home economics in school to learn to cook and sew, and were taught to be polite at all times. Luckily, my parents believed that their growing tribe of boys and girls could do anything. When I was 9, my father coached a middle school football team in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. He brought me to practice one day, and some of the boys teased him. "Coach," they said, "you didn't tell us you had a girl." "Yep," he said, "but she's as tough as you are." He then challenged 2 of the boys to a pull-up competition with me. I wanted to die of embarrassment until I was actually in the competition. Then I wanted to win. And at least in my dad's memory, I did. My mortification gave way to a secret pride in being physically strong, a self-perception that became a superpower. In an age when most girls were cheering on the sidelines for boys playing sports, I wanted to be nowhere but on the field itself. Necessity prompted my parents to insist a scrappy, entrepreneurial courage in their brood. Raising 7 kids on a military salary was no easy feat. When my brothers and I complained that everybody else's mom bought them Levi's jeans or Converse sneakers, our mom would give us the evil eye for wanting to be like everyone else. "You don't need to wear brand names," she'd say, disappointed. "You are Novogratz's. But if you seriously feel the need to be like other people, I'll make a deal with you. I'll cover the cost of plain jeans or sneakers at the Army Post Exchange, and you pay for the difference for the branded ones." My parents believed that each of us was capable of doing anything we set our minds to. And having someone play the role of encourager is one of the biggest gifts any one of us can receive. It reinforces the courage that comes just by believing you count, that you're capable of something. And it doesn't really matter what that something is. As a result of my mother's deal-making, we were always looking for entrepreneurial ways to earn income for greater independence, and sometimes to buy those Levi's. I started babysitting when I was 10, then went to work behind the ice cream counter at a Howard Johnson's at 14, before ultimately bartending while still in high school. And I made and sold Christmas ornaments door to door to earn enough money for school trips. Each experience required facing into discomfort, knocking at the houses of strangers to introduce myself, to ask people to buy things I'd put my heart into making. I had to learn to deal with rejection, to make decisions for myself, and to handle money. And while the first or second or sometimes 10th time I tried something might still feel uncomfortable, each experience expanded my worldview, even the most incremental of victories imparting me with the belief that life could be a great adventure if you were willing to dare. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the ability to look fear in the face and continue to walk forward. All of us have something that frightens us, whether or not we admit it. And there are as many forms of courage as there are of fear. Only by nurturing our courage will we prevent our fears from making us and then keeping us small. Childhood gave me the courage to take physical and entrepreneurial risks, but it did not prepare me to speak truth to power. The institutions that grounded my youth did just the opposite. In fact, reinforcing the idea that girls especially were supposed to be good and respectful. Though I might have imagined myself a maverick, I also was groomed to be polite and considerate, without being honest or tough enough to ask for what I really needed. As a child, when I most needed courage to use my voice, I lacked any skill or sense of my own power whatsoever. After a long night of babysitting, a neighborhood father drove me home. He parked the car in our house's driveway, turned to me as if to say goodnight, and suddenly began kissing and forcing himself on me. I pleaded for him to stop and fought to get out from under him. But I was also, somehow, polite until I managed to wriggle free. I was 12 years old. I can still remember my outfit. A pink gingham button-down shirt tucked into bell-bottom jeans with little houses embroidered around the waistband and an oversized pink comb in the back pocket. My long hair in braids tied with little white ribbons. I had never before kissed a boy, nor really even considered the possibility. I rushed into the house and saw my brave, loving father talking at the kitchen table with one of his best friends. The only word I could muster was hello. I scrambled up the golden shag-carpeted stairs to the bathroom and jumped in the shower, wearing all of my clothes. Sitting in the bathtub, the water pouring over me from overhead, I felt dirty and ashamed, confused and hurt. I never babysat for that family again, coming up with all sorts of excuses to avoid doing so. For decades, I gave no external voice to my internal hurt, at least not to adults. I must have believed or known somehow that saying aloud what had happened would upset the social order of my world. I knew that my parents would have been devastated. My father was the kindest man I knew, and he had returned from Vietnam only months before. My mother was fierce, fearless, and focused when it came to raising her brood. I could not bear the thought of hurting either of them. I dreaded the very notion that my father might injure the neighbor in his desire to avenge me. And what of the man's wife and children? I convinced myself that silence was a better option. I had neither permission nor practice to say aloud the true things that might need to be said, even if they harmed the reputation of a respected member of the community. 40 years later, when I heard the news of the neighbor's death, I felt an unexpected sense of freedom. Now I understand that I was caught in a system that required the silence of the weak in order to protect and maintain the privilege of the strong. We remain voiceless because we fear rejection, shame, or letting each other down. We stay silent when bad things happen to us or those around us, afraid of losing status or love or the security of home. We want to keep our jobs or maintain the peace, or in some situations, stave off further violence. Thankfully, systems that privilege some groups over others have begun to erode. A generation is more willing to confront ugly truths, openly recognizing that acts by some to denigrate or hurt others are unacceptable. People are finding others to stand in solidarity with them, even if they live in different communities. For any of us to be free, we must all be free. Finding one's own voice and using it is one of the most difficult kinds of courage to develop. It grows from discovering and valuing our most authentic selves, regardless of the systems and structures that otherwise might attempt to define us. For those who've been injured, this requires courageously confronting our own trauma and injuries. But courage is a muscle. The more we exercise it, even in small ways, the more courageous we become. Sometimes life gives us opportunities to do the right thing, even at a possible cost to ourselves. In my first job, I recognized a worrying pattern in a Swiss bank that had significant loans outstanding with Chase. It looked to me as if the bank would fail. The country director in Geneva ridiculed me as a baby banker who clearly had no understanding of the way Swiss banks operated. My boss discouraged me from politically ruffling powerful feathers. But I had triple-checked my work, and I knew that my job was to raise concerns, even if the worst-case scenario never happened. And so, I did. After an anxious, wakeful night, I sat at a big wooden desk across from the bank's towering, powerful country head. My knuckles were white from gripping the seat beneath me, and I felt as if I were in a roiling storm at sea. My voice quaking and resisting the urge to vomit, I relayed my conclusions to the disdainful country leader. Later, I submitted my report to the credit committee. I didn't sleep for the next 2 nights, anxious that my findings might result in the loss of my job. A few days later, the bank failed. My reputation was burnished, and I internalized the importance of speaking my truth, even through trembling lips. I also tried to remind myself that things could have gone differently. The bank might have stayed afloat, and my boss could have just seen me as a troublemaker. But at least my integrity, even if known only by me, would have remained intact. That experience fueled my courage to stand up for my beliefs when I switched from banking on Wall Street to microfinance in Rwanda. A local priest had accused our microfinance organization, Brene, of usury or charging illegally high interest. Though we charged women just 12% a year to borrow versus the informal money lenders, who charged as much as 10% per day. Knowing I'd survived my initial discomfort at Chase, I was more prepared to confront the cultural guardians in Rwanda. In Rwanda, the stakes were higher, for they were not just about my career, but our organization's very mandate. Even after I was gaining the courage of my convictions and learning to fight for my beliefs, I still lacked confidence in another area of my life: public speaking. When it came to speaking in front of groups, it took me longer to learn that fear is conquerable if you confront it. Understand what lies beneath it, and then face it, often repeatedly, until you make it a friend. As with most hard things, that takes practice. The particular fear of public speaking showed up early in my life and persisted. When I was a teenager, my knees would quake whenever I had to. My knees would knock whenever I had to give a presentation. On Wall Street, we had to study public speaking as part of our training. After witnessing my nervous laughter and rapid-fire speech, my instructor told me that I was perhaps the worst public speaker she had ever encountered. That single comment set me back. Set back my confidence even further. But I knew that public speaking would be an essential skill for leading change, so I looked for opportunities to present to small groups, sometimes staying up half the night to practice. If a speech went well, I'd gain a bit of confidence. If it was a flop, I'd think about what I could learn from the experience. It took years to get to the point where sometimes I even enjoyed public speaking. During this process, I also learned to calm my nerves. As a young woman, I'd listen to the advice of those who told me to pump myself up before speaking. That only stressed me further. Imagine the audience naked, someone else suggested. But that image distressed me. Pretending I was a superhero served to keep the attention on myself. That didn't work either. It took years for me to realize that I had it all backward. Rather than focus on myself, I needed to direct my attention to the audience. I was speaking, after all, as a messenger, not a protagonist. My job was simply to be an instrument of love. I'd remind myself, whether to inspire thought or provoke action. Rather than attempting to stare down my ego, I would try to allow my ego to dissolve. This approach turned out to be a grounding mechanism, enabling me to get out of my own way and do what I had come to do. All of us are at times strong and at other times fragile. Certain and unsure, these contradictions are part of the human condition. Sometimes the same people who display nerves of steel when negotiating high-stakes deals find it almost impossible to provide difficult feedback to beloved employees. Each act requires its own kind of courage, and few of us are fearless in every situation. Some people fear being viewed as imperfect or unworthy. Instead of courageously communicating mistakes or failures, they hide small problems, denying partners or friends or investors the chance to help rectify the situation. Sometimes these same problems grow into full-blown disasters, making manifest the very fears that person tried to avoid. At Acumen, we've lost important investments because a team member lacked the confidence to advocate for a risky deal, assuming others would think him crazy for proposing it. But if you want to play it safe, you shouldn't get into the business of change. Change involves risk, and risk, which is not the same as recklessness, requires courage. Institutions can try to make it easier for people to take risks, but it is up to each of us to practice small acts of courage so that we build muscles to do the right thing. Regularly, we should ask ourselves, what is the cost of not daring, of not trying, of not speaking up when it matters? Practice courage until you become courageous. Think of fear not as a bad thing, but simply as a mechanism to alert you to emotional or physical danger. The more you confront what lies beneath the fear, the more you can tackle it through repeated confrontations and small victories. Those wins, ultimately, will prepare you for the times when the world needs you to stand bravely in the fire and take on the seemingly impossible. So, practice courage. Practice it in small ways and increasingly in larger ways. The world has never needed all of us more than right now. And there are a million ways to practice that courage. Because as we do the Great Reset, we're going to need more of it than ever. So, thanks for listening. And I am just checking out these beautiful comments. Yes, Emma, life will be a greater adventure if you are willing to dare. Charlotte asks, what made you push through your fear of public speaking instead of giving up on it? Truthfully, there were times when I thought it would have been better to give up on it. But I knew, when you think about who the change makers are, they're storytellers. They're out advocating. And if I wanted to consider myself this fighter that was also going to try to fully change the way that we fight, fueled by compassion as well as a ferocity, then I better learn how to tell stories in ways that other people could hear. And I better learn how to get up in small groups and in large groups. And I just figured if I did it enough times, I'd learn. And literally, I would stay up sometimes the whole night for a 3 or 4 or 5 minute speech. And I think over time, I saw that it did get easier. And as I say in the book, and then there was this moment, and mind you, I was in my 30s, late 30s. When it happened, it was incredible. I think you also learn by pushing yourself and think about discomfort as a proxy for progress. Because you start to learn what your own tricks are. Other people are great at following scripts on a page. My superpower is that I connect to people. It's one of the reasons that speaking into computers is sometimes challenging for me, because I'm looking for that person with whom I can connect. And so in a big audience, ironically, I want the lights on the audience so I can see the audience. I don't want to hide the audience. Other people want to hide the audience. I'm not good with a script. I wouldn't have learned any of that if I hadn't gotten uncomfortable in practicing and finding what allowed me to connect and to speak in a way that could only be mine. And then hopefully you start to get some positive feedback and that moves you on your way. Another great question from Dear Charlotte. How do you know when to be courageous and when to step back? I think knowing when to step back is a form of courage. And that also goes to the story and the practice of listening, deep listening. Sometimes, as a leader, a mistake that I have made and that we all make is that we go too fast for our organizations or for the communities we're here to serve. In the introduction, I talked about when the women, my co-founders, pushed too fast before society had really understood what we were doing to change bride price. And by going faster than the society was even able to integrate it, they pretty much lost everything. And there would have been courage in reaching out to listen to their constituents before they almost recklessly saw an opportunity and pushed something through. And I've done that myself. So I would say part of courage is to share things before they are fully baked with a trusted group who will give you honest feedback, and have the courage to hear feedback on this idea that you might be holding really tightly to. And it might be a great idea, just not yet. And so part of courage is surrounding yourself with people who are not like you, who bring a different skill set to the table. And you don't have to be running an organization to do that. No matter who you are, you can build your own kitchen cabinet, if you will. Those friends who are courageous enough to tell you when you're veering off track. Parents who, understanding they want to keep you safe, sometimes will also tell you a truth that you don't want to hear. And so you've got to connect that listening to courage as well. And again, here's where the tension is. At Acumen, we talk about values and tension, listening and leading. They are not opposites. But sometimes, even whenever everybody tells you, go left, but everything in your experience and understanding after having listened to everyone still tells you to go right. There are times when you have to have the courage to go right anyway. You have to take responsibility for that decision. And I've done that too. And when it works, everyone comes with you. You have to take responsibility when it doesn't work too. So it's courage at every one of these steps. Do you relate to Brene Brown's work regarding courage and vulnerability? Oh my goodness. Are you kidding? 100%. We have all these caricatures in our systems that so value money, power, fame. In that we look at the courageous hero standing on the stage, and then in some ways we abdicate responsibility to go and do the work that's needed to do. I think the kind of courageous leaders we need today are those leaders who are strong enough to show their own vulnerability, to share their mistakes, their failures. Because when people can see that human part of you, they're much more willing and able to trust. And importantly, that they're much more willing to see that their job too is not to be perfect, but to be human. When I was younger, someone gave me a great compliment. I didn't fully understand it was a compliment because we had had a very contentious relationship, but again, used discomfort as a proxy for progress. But she said, "Jacqueline, you're a reed that will bend, but you will not break." And that reed gets batted around in the wind sometimes. It can hurt. I had to learn to share the hurt and to ask others to hold it with me sometimes. And that is when I started to realize, she is right, I will not break. And I know where I can bend, and I know those values that are immutable. And the more you get to know me, the more you get to know what those are too. So yes, I think Brene talks about the front and the back, the soft front and the one's soft and one's hard. That's what we've got to hold. Hold ourselves open to each other, but know we've got a strong back. I think we're running out of time, but I just so appreciate these beautiful questions that you all are holding and asking. So thank you. Courage. Eleanor Roosevelt, who is one of my great heroes and inspired a lot of the wisdom in the book, she would say, do something you fear every day. I try to say to my team members when we do reviews, so at least once or twice a year, what are you going to do this year that scares you? Lean into it. Try it. Fall down. The real courage is getting up and trying it again. So to each of you, think of one thing that frightens you and walk toward it. Don't run away from it. You'll be surprised what you find as you move in that direction. Have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you tomorrow.